Thank you for joining us for another episode of Margin for Error. I'm excited to have Michael Corr, founder and CEO of Duro, for joining us today. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, for listeners who might not be familiar with you or Duro, can you give us the 30-second elevator pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. So Duro, there's a relatively new term being used. We're in the software for hardware category. So my background, I'm actually an electrical engineer and been designing and manufacturing various products throughout my career. And having used many of the software tools that help me manage my designs and production cycles and communications across the different teams, I found them horribly antiquated and inefficient. Came about from the 80s and 90s. And for those of you who are not familiar with the hardware industry, really hadn't innovated in a good, multiple decades. And so it was time that something changed. And so that was really what motivated me to get off the bench and do something about it. And so Duro is, in essence, it's under a product category called PLM, Product Lifecycle Management, which has been around for a long time. But it's really what it is. The best analogy is it's like a GitHub. It's that centralization of hardware teams' source code, but instead of it being JavaScript or Python files, it's CAD files and bill of material and supply chain. And so it's the same thing where we centralize all that information. We manage revisions of them. There's the equivalent of a pull request in hardware. It's called a change order, where a change is promoted, needs to be reviewed and approved or rejected. And ultimately, it aggregates all the data from all the different teams, electrical, mechanical, procurement, manufacturing, assembles it, and creates that unique package with a ribbon on it that sends to the manufacturing team to get produced. And so that's what our software manages.
It's, obviously, it sounds like you have a very long history in hardware. I don't know if anyone's ever asked you this, but what initially drew you to hardware engineering rather than software?
That's a great question, actually. It was in college, I just would sign up for courses that interested me. So the little backstory, actually, I don't think I've ever mentioned this before. So in high school, I fell in love with physics. And then in college, I started out as a physics major. It seemed like a natural progression. But then I had an extra course available in my syllabus. And so I took a computer science class. And I dabbled in computer science before, but this was my first formal education, and I loved it. And so then I switched majors from a physics to computer science. And then I found out about this dual degree engineering program, which was more of an applied, physics, as you will. And so then I applied to the engineering program because that seemed more interesting. I started out as a computer engineer, and then again through the course, curriculum and syllabus, I ended up being an electrical engineer. And I think what electrical engineering allowed me to do was kind of scratch two itches. One was the tangible building things. I love building circuits and little robots and various things, but it also allowed me to itch the computer science scratch, where I could still develop the code or the firmware that would enable or empower my circuits or my little contraptions or robots or whatever products I was working on. So it was a nice kind of amalgamation of all the things I was interested in. Yeah.
You are based in Los Angeles. And so how has being part of the LA hardware ecosystem, and again, I think for those who might not know, you are a big advocate and a proponent of building this community and this ecosystem in Los Angeles. How has the ecosystem influenced your journey as an entrepreneur?
It's evolved quite a bit in an exciting way. So I actually moved here to Los Angeles in 2016 from San Francisco. San Francisco, there was plenty of engineers, hardware and software, and everyone I think knows that story. When I moved to Los Angeles in that time, there really wasn't a lot really going on in the more entrepreneurial sense. Los Angeles does have a huge economy of manufacturing and supply chain and what have you. But I would say there have been more traditional industries, whereas the entrepreneurial industry of startups working on new types of product categories, robotics, and vehicles, space technology, really hadn't blossomed to what it is today. And it's kind of hidden in different pockets around town. But I think through just, various events like people moving to LA, I think LA has seen its own resurgence of interest from lots of different walks of life coming to LA. It's a fantastic city. Also with the huge boon of aerospace and space technology coming out of the El Segundo area, kind of had an origins in SpaceX and a lot of people leaving and starting their own businesses there. There's now a very, very vibrant and exciting hardware community across the LA County.
Interesting. I read somewhere that you were jealous of the software agile renaissance. I don't know if
Yeah.
you call that, but we were able to dig that up somewhere and
Yeah.
read about that. So when you think about that and kind of reflecting on that, and you think about kind of your own aha moment where you thought, I need to do something for this industry. What was that kind of breaking point? What was that aha moment for you?
Yeah. Well, so I think I had a very, fortuitous front row seat to the evolution of the technology. So working in San Francisco for a lot of exciting companies, I was primarily working on the hardware portion. Across the aisle would be the software teams, whether they be working on web apps or other various products. And I had various friends, obviously, in the software industry. It's hard to throw a stone in San Francisco and not hit a software developer. And so I just learned a lot through being around that community about the agile movement, obviously the cloud and API development and having obviously, origins in computer science. I was able to appreciate it and start looking for ways to adopt it into my own development. So how I would develop firmware or even hardware, I looked for ways, how do I automate? How do I build that famous feedback loop that agile promotes of developing something, pushing it, testing it, and iterating, right? How do we do that in that hardware ecosystem? And obviously, it has different constraints and certainly limitations, but there were ways to bring it into the hardware world to develop firmware or testing hardware, what have you. And so I just recognized that that needed to happen for hardware to get better. But the other underlying portion, what made it possible for the software to even have that tight iteration loop, was that everything was seamlessly connected, automatic, right? With the cloud and with GitHub being, cloud based instead of on-prem based, it was trivial for any two or more software developers to connect, share their source code, curate, communicate. Things like Jira and various other tools just made it seamless for anyone in the world to participate in a software development project and learn from it and contribute to it. And it was all based on the premise that there was this digital thread, this seamless digital thread that anyone with an IP address in a web browser could connect. And so that was really what the foundation was. It allowed all those innovations on top of the agile principle to even happen. And so that's what we had to start with in the hardware industry. How do we allow all the different teams in hardware, mechanical, electrical, procurement, manufacturing, and in hardware, now the economy, it's not so unique to hardware industry, but historically it's very, very common for those teams to be scattered around the world, right? The very common hardware business model was the products would be designed in the US but manufactured overseas, right? So inherently you have a disconnect. You have different companies, different cultures, different languages, and that really blocked a lot of the potential to adopt these agile principles because there was this air gap between all the different teams. And so I recognized, and as you noted, I was jealous of all the innovations that were being possible in the software industry. I said, well, how do we bring that to hardware? And that's really where we focus. And that was really one of the things that differentiates our product at Duro. It's not that, the PLM product category has existed for a while, as I've noted, but what we were doing differently was we very much stressed how do we focus on the underlying digital thread? How do we make that a core competency of Duro that customers can out of the box just connect their different teams together? They didn't have to hire an outside consultant to build some custom integration or purchase other third-party products, which had been the case historically.
Interesting. We're going to come back to Duro and Duro, the product. But before that, I mean, the statistics on startup success, and you clearly saw a problem as well as the opportunity. What still gave you the confidence to take the startup founder leap?
In hindsight, I think I was just naive. No, it's a problem I've been, astutely aware of for years because it impacted me as an engineer, as a manager. I just saw and experienced a lot of the risks and costs associated with bad data being permeated across the teams. And so initially the motivation obviously was, to CYA, just to make sure that I didn't get fired doing my own job. I wanted to build a better tool that helped me manage my own productions and communication. But I saw, the writing on the wall that the industry itself and the hardware market was changing. And there were more and more people like me that were adopting or at least respecting all the innovations coming out of the software industry. And we're going to be looking for those types of cloud, agile, digital thread experiences in their work environment. And so I saw a huge opportunity to kind of meet that culture where it was headed. A little bit of foolishness, a little bit of excitement of making a change is really what motivated me to start the company.
Got it. You started Duro in and correct me if I'm wrong, about 2017. And you started off initially bootstrapping. Why not
Mhm.
raise venture capital or raise money from day one?
Because in the 2017 era, no VC would touch hardware with a 10-foot pole. It was not by choice, trust me. No, it was, again, I don't know if it was indicative of being in LA or the VC community, but hardware really wasn't considered an investable endeavor, right? Even though we'd say no SaaS, through one lens, we're a classic enterprise B2B SaaS package. Like, can you invest in us through that model? And some of them would maybe get through that door, but they would always say, no, you're dependent on the hardware market and we don't do hardware. Or, I laugh at this now, like investors, would say, oh, we don't think it's a big enough market, right? Or these classic, and some of them I know they're just giving lip service for me to go away. And some of them, that was their true opinion. It wasn't a big enough market. And I'd laugh. I'd be like, well, the computer you typed that email on to tell me, or the phone you picked up to call me to tell me that message is hardware. How many people in the world have a laptop or an iPhone or a Fitbit or have a car or have clothes on their back? Like, that's how big the market is, right? Every tangible good has these same problems that Duro is trying to solve. And so I initially I'd be pissed when investors tell me the market's not big enough. But over a while, you grow some tough skin when you get all those rejections. Well, anyway, I think early on, a lot of investors just wouldn't touch this category. And there are other things like machine learning, the precursor to AI was hot. We didn't want to pretend to be something we were not. So we didn't, pretend that we're doing machine learning just to get an investment. E-commerce or finance apps were in vogue then and very investable. But eventually, I think through various catalysts and events, the venture community finally caught on to actually how big and important this problem is. And so that certainly helped. And then I think also just through perseverance and good numbers, we have to finally convince some investors, yeah, there's some business here.
So, as you reluctantly bootstrapped in the early days, what
Yeah.
did it force you to prioritize or do differently had you gone venture capital or some sort of investment early on?
Yeah. Trust me, as a founder, you always revisit all your decisions, the good ones and the bad ones, and you say, how would I have done things differently? That never ends. And some of it's just circumstantial. Like you may not have had another different opportunity or different choice, given the circumstances. So I think one of the things that impacts the bootstrapping versus raising venture, and to be honest, by the time we actually did start getting offers, we were actually close to being profitable on our own. And so we did have a heart to heart. My co-founder, Kellen, we had a heart to heart conversation. Like, do we take this venture capital or do we continue on this path being bootstrapped? Obviously, the trade-offs being bootstrapped, you have complete sovereignty, a larger percentage of your company. But the downside being we were very hand to mouth, right? We couldn't make big investments. We couldn't take big risks per se. And we just felt that the market was truly starting to turn like we had predicted. In order to really kind of, so to speak, jump on that train that was starting to move fast, and we needed an injection of cash to be able to catch on and keep up. And so I think what I would have done differently though is I probably might not have bootstrapped as long as we did because it did end up really hampering some investments like talent. When you're bootstrapped and you have tens of thousands or low hundreds of thousands of cash, like you can't hire the top talent that you want to, right? And so you get creative, but you fill things in with contractors or part-time or service firms or what have you. And it's different. Really changes the DNA of your company when it's not full-time employees co-located, who have a vested interest in the success of the company beyond just, an invoice and a monthly, paycheck. So I think I would have pushed harder to hire more people or found more creative ways to find that talent with the budget we had.
Yeah. I know you and I we've talked, many times in the past of just how important it's been for you and Duro to build that culture and having people that are as invested in the vision and kind of the mission of what
Yeah.
you and your team are building. Early on, obviously, I think one of the milestones, as you mentioned, is profitability. Was there something else that also kind of gave you the, dare I say, validation that you knew you had something real? Was it an early customer? Was there something that the market, maybe, even an investor might have said to you that said, okay, I think we really have something now?
Yeah, honestly, it was the customers. I literally had a customer give me a hug, be like, "Where have you been all my life?" I like we started to tap, and it took a while to find that that culture. The famous customer chasm. We did have to find those early adopters, right? Because there's definitely a large market of the laggards, right, or the late adopters, and they didn't always see the value that Duro was offering. And so once we were able to really tap into where those early adopters were, who understood what we were doing and understood the vision and understood the premise, the whole foundation of why we existed, it was just a perfect fit, right? And so we were getting like resounding applause and feedback and gratitude that there's something different that really was answering what the culture shift that was asking for.
I know it's been a minute, but if we go back and we think about the first version of Duro, do you remember what it looked like and how far has
Yes.
product, how far has it gone? Has it come to what it is today? What was
Yes.
it like?
Oh man, it's night and day. Yeah, I even for personal like posterity and archiving reasons, I've taken downloads of old websites too, and like once in a while I find myself looking at what the first Duro website looked like, and it's, oh my god, I can't believe that was up there. Um, yes, absolutely. The first product has tremendously evolved. I mean, the roots and the vision have always been there, right? And for us, it was about the simplicity, the out of the box, the plug and play capabilities. Duro owning the responsibility of the connections in the digital thread versus, again, historically products in our category have always handed it off to third parties or the customers themselves. That has always been there, but the product itself has evolved so much, obviously through natural, maturity, customers providing feedback and feature requests. But the biggest shift is, and this has been published as well. A little over a year ago, we did a major product retrenching, I'll call it. And it was really motivated by just all the excitement and innovations in the AI and SaaS itself, and us, kind of having our own crossroads moment of, do we continue on the current product platform or do we effectively start over? And the summary of that story is we did end up starting over from scratch, taking all the lessons learned in the product and the customers from the prior 4 or 5 years. And the things that why we were comfortable doing that was SaaS technology itself has evolved huge amount. Even before AI was introduced, from 2017 to 2024, SaaS technology has matured incredible, faster tools, better, design patterns, things that we were building by hand are now commodities, and, we don't have to do that. But then you add on top of it the value of AI, both in features to customers, but also for your own assistance to develop the product, really gave us the courage to start over. And so we did. And of course, the product is incredibly, more mature and powerful and capable. Um, and I'm incredibly proud with that project.
So you had mentioned this transformation, and does not sound like it was a light lift by any means. So what does being AI native actually mean for Duro? And can you give us kind of an example of how AI has changed the user experience or the user outcome?
Yeah. So that was part of this retrenching was, the data models. So the database, was designed intentionally for how do AI models look at your data? How do they look at the database schema, right? How do you help them help you, making it easier for these large models to be able to extract data and extract content and inference from what's going on. And so, because with the prior product, the database, we were kind of like, trying to jam a square peg into a round hole and strapping on AI on top of it. And it was working, but it wasn't as seamless. And we knew we'd reach some, tech debt eventually. And so simple things like that, designing the backend and the API to make it easier for AI, LLMs and eventually MCPs to be able to connect to our system and to be able to contribute content and create value out of that content. And so that's what the AI native portion is about. In terms of the actual value add, I mean, we add some basic stuff that I wouldn't say is unique to us to start out with, like, search, obviously being natural language search being a very now commonplace capability, but very, very important. Our particular product category, these PLM products are very, very difficult to find content. And you have hundreds of users. Just think, an engineer, they want to add a screw or resistor or something to the library. They can guess it's probably in there, but if it's hard to find, they're like, I don't know if the screw already exists in the library. I'm just going to create a new instance, right? Because I need to get my job done. And pretty soon your library just gets muddied with lots of duplicate or redundant data, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. And so having a very powerful search engine just makes it so much easier for users to find the content they're looking for, both for reporting, but also for creating and minimizing duplicity. So that stuff was pretty easy and was quite fun to do. But there's other things too where, what AI does, among many things, but one of the unique value adds that it does is it's very good at processing data as it is and doesn't need to be transposed into a common format, and which is just the perfect fit for PLM, because by definition, PLM is the aggregation of multiple data repositories in different data formats, potentially even different languages, right? Electrical data looks different than mechanical data. Supply chain data looks different than any other data, right? If you're using teams across different countries, it could be in different languages, what have you. And so again, going back to that digital thread problem, historically, people, whether it's the PLM provider or the third parties, had to write these transposition integrations that would transpose the data from its origin into the PLM data model to be uniform before you can create any value on top of it. Now AI does that for you, right? You can leave data as it is. It can be in Chinese, it can be in Spanish, it can be in English, it could be, your own private vernacular. It doesn't matter. Once it knows how to read your native data, it can transpose it for you and create value on top of it. And so that's one of the things that we're leaning into very heavily, and greatly reduces the dependency on us to develop all those tools for our customers.
Really interesting. It does not sound like this was, it sounds like, I think you called it a retrenching, but, to this transformation. Would you say you're done for now, or is it still in the
You're never done. It's software, right? That's why it's called software, because it's malleable. And no, we're not done. I mean, even our own initial roadmap, we still have plenty to do. And then, we've got some really fantastic new customers that are asking for even more. The market is evolving. This whole software for hardware category that's evolving, it's really exciting. There's new products coming onto market all the time that, are great compatible products with Duro. They supplement what we're offering. And so we want to work with them or integrate with them, or our customers are asking as such. And so there's always something new coming online that is helping shape Duro to be always current, I'll say, with what's evolving, what's happening in this space. And to be honest, it's really exciting. Going back to that jealousy thing, why I was jealous, I guess, man, it's almost 20 years ago, 2008, 2007-ish. Why I was jealous wasn't just the simplicity, but it was just the volume of innovation that was happening. Like, new products were coming to market for software developers almost every day. And, in the hardware industry at the time, it was like you had, vanilla and chocolate. That's it, right? You switch jobs, either they're using the vanilla flavor or the chocolate flavor. And it's like, okay, here we go. And so now 2025, it's just, we're seeing that same level of innovation in the hardware space. New products are coming to market, new ideas on how do you manage your CAD files or your supply chain, new ways to communicate or collaborate across the different teams. And it's just very exciting to be part of this.
So again, you mentioned earlier the shift, early on, especially the investor community didn't quite understand hardware and the opportunity that being in hardware actually had. That obviously changed after a few years, and definitely the amount of progress and milestone that you and the Duro team has created. So ultimately, you did end up raising money. You did, you brought on some really kind of prominent investors like Bonfire and Riot Ventures. When you were going through the fundraising process,
Mhm.
what were you looking for in investors beyond just the check?
A partner. What I felt at the time and still believe, investors have a fantastic pattern matching algorithm, right? And so I was looking for someone who can help pattern match. Again, looking through one lens is not to diminish the value of it. We are just yet another enterprise B2B SaaS product. But through that lens, it also meant there's certain patterns on what type of growth you should be looking for. What are the right KPIs you need to be focusing on? What are the go-to-market strategies that have worked or didn't work? When to build a sales team? What's the ratio of developers to marketing and sales staff? All those types of things. I had no experience with. I had plenty of experience building hardware products and hardware teams, bringing to market, and had a vision. But there's a lot of stuff as a founder I just didn't have any experience with. And of course, you can read the books, but the books don't always contextualize it for you. And so that's one of the main things I was looking for in investors, is someone who had seen patterns in prior investments in their portfolios that they have learned from and can teach those learning stuff. There are many things as a founder you want and need to be innovating and changing the world and changing how the status quo. But there are many more things you don't want to be innovating on, right? You're like, I want to follow status quo. Like, how do I set up my QuickBooks? Like, I don't need to innovate there, right?
It's a great example. As you look back then on your fundraising journey, and again, you've raised a couple of times. What would you do differently as a founder, as a CEO?
That's a great question. I'm very happy with the investors we brought on. So you're right. The first round was led by Bonfire and Riot, matched, and we had another round. Bonfire and Riot still participated. That was led by Primary, based in New York. And we had a handful of other, super angels and smaller funds along the way. I'm also very proud of and glad they're a part of the team. Honestly, I don't know that I would do anything much differently. I mean, I think I did feel that fundraising is a little bit of obviously your own preparation, a little bit of luck, and a little bit of timing. And hopefully you get to be in a position where you have a strong round with some strong investors and a little bit of competition.
Yeah. You had mentioned, that this is most folks in the hardware space, they had a choice between vanilla and chocolate. Unfortunately, vanilla and chocolate are massive incumbents in some form or fashion. When you think about Duro, how do you position against some of these legacy giants?
So some of that's very simple. There's the hardware community. It's getting in a good way, it's getting more diverse, but for a while it was very bimodal. There was the older generation who had entered the workforce in the 80s and 90s who had grown up in their careers using these traditional on-prem Windows desktop, paper trail type of processes. And there was a big gap in the industry of hiring talent because it was a lot of the young talent was drawn to the software industry. And so it wasn't a continuous ingress of young talent. But then there was a new model that was growing, which was this younger generation that grew up in the cloud and Facebook and Instagram and knew agile natively, and they were now entering the hardware workforce. And so we obviously try and target the latter market because they instinctively know what we're doing, and in fact, some of them don't even know what PLM stands for. We just tell them that we're a revision control, and they're like, "Yeah, I get it." Like GitHub, like yes, and you're like, "We're a PLM." They're like, "A PLM what?" You're like, "Never mind, just buy our software." And so that works to our advantage. But then when you're going after the first culture market, you do have to still continue to segment them. There are the tried and true, old dog new trick saying is very, very true. There's some people, it's very segmented. There's some people who are grumpy, like I've been doing it this way for 30 years. Why would I ever change? Right. So damn, you just quickly chop off. There's ones who say, I've been doing it for 30 years, but I'm ready for change. Or like, I recognize that there are new and better ways to do it. Show me what's possible, right? And so you're more of an education, and those are fun to work with. And then there's more that are like, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've been studying this stuff, and I've been playing with new tools, and I've on my own discovered that Duro is what we want. Like, where do I buy, right? And so the best way that we can, segment ourselves against the incumbents is really just that, first off, just the cultural differences and expectations of our product, because those products have been around for 30 plus years, so we'll never be able to compete with them on feature parity. They're just going to have more features, right? And once you embrace that, that's okay. You find the customers that don't need all those features, and then where the features that you do have parity with, you show them that how much better, easier, faster, cheaper, whatever yours are compared to those incumbents. And that's really the best way to do it. It's through definitely, trial and error, but you definitely have to learn how to segment your market, and you learn how to do proper discoveries so that you're not wasting time, trying to tell someone who's not who you think they are.
Yeah. I think Duro has, I'll call it unique privilege of being through a couple of global events, one of them being COVID.
Yeah.
And so COVID obviously exposed a lot of vulnerabilities within the supply chain. And then suddenly everyone is paying attention to hardware and how are we still going to make these things at the traditional way that we've known to make it? Did that impact or shift Duro's trajectory in any way?
It did, and you're right. So a couple of things when COVID hit, like everybody, we all were kind of bracing, not knowing what's happening. What do we do? It was prior COVID first hit prior to when we raised venture capital, so we still had a lot of sovereignty to make those decisions ourselves. But we did find that first off, a lot of our customers got creative. So like we heard things where they obviously all stayed at home, but their products circumstantially were small enough that they'd ship the prototypes to each other. Like each would do their responsibility to the product and then ship it to the next person on the team and what have you. We heard a lot of creative ways of getting around the working from home with hardware where everyone has to tangibly it's a tangible good to interact with. But on our part too, we were bracing for impact. We were expecting all because obviously supply chain just went close, right? And that's where the whole world understood how fragile the supply chain industry was, right? A lot of us in the hardware industry already knew that, but when the general population couldn't get their toothpaste and toilet paper at Trader Joe's anymore, they realized supply chain industry is pretty fragile. Like, yeah, it is. And so we were bracing for impact where we were expecting customers to call us and say, sorry, but we got to conserve our costs and we're just going to go back to spreadsheets or something like that. We need to save every dollar we can. But what ended up happening was it was actually a huge boon for Duro because going back to our whole premise of that digital thread, one of the things that we stressed early on was tightening that air gap between design teams and procurement teams and supply chain teams. And I've got tons of my own stories where I would design a circuit, I'd send it over the wall to the procurement team to go buy the parts, and they say the part's not available or lead time's too long or it doesn't meet our budget. I'd have to go back to the drawing board and redesign it for available parts. And lots of wasted time and costs in that cycle. And with a lot of suppliers starting to digitize their catalogs and services, that was one of the first things that Duro did was we integrated all that content into our platform. So now designers could, on their own, discover the supply chain availability as they're doing the design work. So that tighten that feedback with the whole agile concept that we talked about. And that was native to Duro at the time. And so what ended up happening was all our customers through that feature were able to pivot on their own when their own suppliers lead times would go out 50 weeks. They were able to use Duro to quickly adapt and shift and find new suppliers, or at least identify the problem earlier versus their supplier calling them, 2 weeks too late. And so what ended up happening is word got out that Duro had this native integration with all these suppliers. And so we actually saw a huge uptick in subscriptions because of COVID.
They kind of understood
Yeah,
in real time, whether they wanted to or not.
exactly.
Something you and I have talked about over the years is, obviously not just the business side of starting a company and entrepreneurship, but also what it's like being kind of a CEO. So when you think about your founder journey to this point, what has been kind of the hardest part of building Duro, not just logistically, but just kind of that emotional, mental of being a founder, of being a CEO of a startup?
Yeah. I'll definitely say it's not for the faint of heart. It takes a huge toll on you personally, physically. I obviously don't have, or I'm not prioritizing, exercise and diet as much as I had before. Since I started the company, I've gotten married and I have 2 kids. And so that too obviously eats into your availability on both sides, right? As an entrepreneur and also as a family member. Like you just have to persevere. Like being a founder and a CEO can get very lonely. Not, and I don't mean it in like a depressing way, but it's just more, matter of fact, because, as a CEO, you obviously part of your job is to inspire and hire a team. Right. And so not that you want to be disingenuous, but they don't need to, you need to pick and choose what information gets filtered to them. When you're the CEO, you see everything. And so every win, every loss, no matter how big or how small, eventually gets to you. And so you have to have thick skin to be able to ride those out. And sometimes you can't always share it or communicate it with other people. Or even if you can, they're not experiencing it the same way that you are. And so they can maybe sympathize, but not necessarily empathize with what you're going through. And so certainly having a very strong relationship with the co-founder helps. A very open and communicative board helps, that too. You want to be able to be transparent and candid with your board and maybe a board of advisors as well. I personally have, hired, CEO coaches, which also help. It's a nice little outlet, kind of an independent person you can talk to. And it's not necessarily like, always emotional things. Sometimes it's just strategy. You just want to be able to talk freely about some crazy ideas without it being judged by board members or employees or other people. And so I think as a founder, get ready to build a thick skin, but make sure you surround yourself with people you can trust and be candid.
If we look at the other side and we talk about some of the wins, and Duro and you and the team have had those wins, you have had the opportunity to have as customers some very innovative companies and organizations, in particular within the space, in the space tech kind of space. What's it like seeing your software enabling that kind of innovation, like that frontier tech? I mean,
It's awesome. We've seen customers launch rockets that we know use their products. I've seen robots crawling the streets of LA and San Francisco that were built on our products. It's really exciting to know that your product helps someone else succeed. Other little things like, so Duro, again, part of our strategy to making that whole out of the box and ease of use premise possible is we come with pre-existing workflows and industry standards and nomenclature and that have you, so that customers don't have to configure it themselves and go through those pains of not even knowing what are the industry best practices. And so you can pick the templates that Duro comes with. You can still configure them on your own if you have a preference, but you don't have to. And so every once in a while, when I'm visiting a customer's site, I go to their production floor or this or that, and I can see the numbering scheme that's one of the default numbering schemes that comes with Duro, and I can see it in all their documentation. I'm like, I know like the impact we've made. Like that documentation is literally permeating throughout the world from across their teams and manufacturers and distributors. And so knowing that because of Duro's model and templates that customers picked it up and were able to be successful and that content is now worldwide, it's very exciting to see.
it's nice kind of seeing that Duro is now part of the ingredient mix. You can't really make the cookie
Yeah.
now without a little bit of.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I also think back, of when I started working on some of those schemes, in my pajamas at home and trying to feed a bottle to my newborn, and coming up with these part numbering systems. And now I see them, scattered throughout the world.
So you work with these innovative companies. Was that by design or was it organic? Like, what's the story behind that?
A little bit of both. Obviously, they're a lot of fun to work with, because it motivates us and, inspires us and our team. But the nature of what Duro was trying to do, it was just a very symbiotic relationship anyway, right? So the way I put it, again, historically, for those not familiar, LM products take a lot of onboarding and configuration, and it's not unheard of for these legacy products to take 6 to 9 months to get installed and your team trained to work on them, right? Lots of things, lots of options, lots of capabilities, lots of custom integrations you might have to build. And Duro just turned that completely upside down and said, we're going to do everything, make it out of the box. And granted, it comes with trade-offs. Like, we're not as extensible, but that's by design. Lots of customers didn't want that much configurability, right? And so having
No,
with
just
your
in terms
customers,
of what are the innovative organizations
oh,
and
right, the symbiotic. Yeah, yeah.
was it
Sorry.
by
Right, okay.
design?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. All right, let's rewind that one. Okay. Sorry, I got lost there.
No, no
Okay.
problem.
Yeah, no, so it was a little bit of both. It was a little bit of circumstantial and a little bit of design. So one of the things that people not familiar with our industry may not know is that historically these types of products take a long, long time to configure and set up before teams can be productive with them. And so Duro, that was one of our whole premises, is how do we flip that and make it as simple and fast as possible for customers to install and start getting ROI on it as quickly as possible. And so when you have a hardware startup or any startup who themselves are trying to get their products to market to prove to their own investors and community that they have something, when it takes 6 to 9 months to set up your infrastructure and they themselves are trying to get their products to market in 3 to 6 months, it's not a good fit. And so because Duro allowed teams to just almost set and forget, like, okay, they purchased Duro, if they use their out of the box templates, they can just be up and running in a matter of days. It was a very good fit for any company that's trying to innovate, right? So, and that's why I think we started trying to create this feedback loop where we were targeting that market. Don't get me wrong. Again, lots of innovation and it's just more fun and enjoyable. But because they themselves are trying to move fast and we were the only product that allowed them to move fast using proper methods, it was just a natural fit.
When you think about, if we look towards the future, what emerging technologies beyond AI do you think will transform hardware?
That's a great question. I was already very happy with the trajectory and the exponential level of innovation that was happening before AI hit the market. And again, I think that was the catalyst to that was this younger burgeoning, culture of people who are interested in hardware again. They're coming to the market with this premise and understanding of the cloud and agile. Even it was inherent. They didn't even know what waterfall was. If you ask them what's the difference between agile and waterfall, they'd be, what's waterfall? You ask them what a Gantt chart is. I don't know what that is, right? I've I remember the days of coming into an office, literally like a 30-foot wall was just a plotter of the Gantt chart of a project, 6-month project, right? They plan the whole thing 6 months ahead, right? Anyway, they didn't even know that industry. And so there already was a lot of innovation coming to the hardware industry. I mean, being really the fundamental thing that changes the industry is demand. It's not a push, it's a pull. And without the culture, without the market of employees demanding these new tools, there wouldn't have been this level of innovation. And so that was already going very fast. And, companies like SpaceX, to give recognition, like I think of SpaceX as a software company, not a hardware company. The way they build rockets is the same way the software teams build software products. It's a lot of fast, iterative, small changes per rocket approach. And that model showed what's possible in hardware. I mean, granted, they had a effectively bottomless budget, so anything was possible. Not everyone has those same resources, but at least painted what's the golden standard of what's possible in hardware. And that really inspired a lot of people to rethink how do we build hardware products. And so there already was a lot of innovation happening in the industry because of these different catalysts. And then you add AI on top of it and just got another turbo boost. And so, and for turbo boost, I think what AI did to hardware was really helped, again, with the data model, the being able to keep data as it is, less dependency on these integration tools. It allowed, Gen AI capabilities are definitely maturing, being able to create certainly like the ground floor of design. Like, as a circuit designer, I can't tell you how many freaking 3-volt and 5-volt power supplies I had to design. Every circuit board, you just start with your layout and you start with the 3-volt, 5-volt, 12-volt, the standard DC voltages. And that stuff's pretty commoditized, but yet I still had to design it. I still had to find the chips and spend, hours testing it and what have you. AI is very good at just saying, give me some parameters and it'll do it for you, right? Great. So now I can focus on the actual innovation of the product itself. What's unique about it, the IP. And so that is what I think AI in many industries is really helping for the hardware industry, allowing you to do more with less.
It sounds like there's still a place for humans in the future state, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
We can have a conversation about hardware, definitely 2025, without talking about tariffs. How are the current tariff situations impacting your customer? And in particular, how has, Duro actually helped companies navigate some of these potential supply chain disruptions?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're seeing similarities to COVID,
Mm.
right? So, but it's a different way. So, supply chain is a mix of lead time and availability. And so, something may be available, but the lead time is long, right? Or something's not available, but once it is, you can get it immediately. And so, with COVID, the lead times just went out, right? No one could get anything. With the tariffs, things are available, but they're just sitting on the dock, right? They can't get it, right? Or they can't pay for the tariffs to get them, or they can't afford them. And hardware, is the economics of hardware are very challenging because you have your own suppliers that you have to pay to get the raw goods. You have your manufacturers you have to pay for them to manufacture and give it to you. And so you have all these bills up front, and you don't often get revenue on your own products until you sell it. And then net terms on top of that. So you're paying, that span of when you pay for your initial raw goods to when you get revenue from the finished good could be 90, 120, 150 days. And so people have built their business models around those assumptions. And so now you tack on tariffs for cash that you have to pay to get your goods off the dock that you didn't plan for in that model. Right. And so lots of people have finished goods sitting on the dock that they can't afford because they didn't collect enough money from the previous sales. It's kind of a flywheel here. And so we're seeing a mix. So fortunately, I haven't seen a lot of impact to our customers that got to us, I guess, in a good way or not. We haven't seen many customers saying they're impacted and somebody have to cancel their accounts or anything like that. We do have a couple of government customers who have asked to pause payment because the government shut down, which is, I guess, independent from tariffs, but is another government related problem. And so, because they don't get their funding or what have you. I think similar with the tariffs, people have been finding innovative ways to get their supply, right? And they're finding other countries of origin, or they're getting more creative again with their net terms, or negotiating with suppliers and what have you. And so I think there's similarities to COVID, where by having such a tight integration with the supply chain industry, we've empowered customers to have access to more information more readily than they ever have before to make decisions. And so we're not quite making suggestions for them per se, but that can be coming down the road in our roadmap. But right now, at least, we're empowering customers to access to more information more quickly so that they can respond and adapt as they need to.
If we shift gears and talk about entrepreneurship, and let's talk to the aspiring founders listening, what advice would you give someone who's thinking about starting a company in hardware, whether it be hardware product or hardware software kind of mix that you and the team are
Yeah.
doing?
Get ready. I'd say, look, any entrepreneur, I've always said, you really, really, really have to be passionate about the problem you're trying to solve. Because as I mentioned, there's going to be fantastic days, like days where you have these huge wins, whether it's an investment, whether it's a new customer, whether it's a new feature you just launched. And those are great highs and endorphin boosts. But you're going to have just as many lows, just as many people saying no to you, or a feature not working as you expected, or you lose a deal, or you lose an investment. And the only thing that really gets you through those low days is your passion to solve the problem. Right? You have to be able to push through that and say, I still believe in this. I still believe in what we're doing. I still believe we're adding value to the larger community. I still believe we're changing the market. Whatever it is that's driving you to begin with, you have to make sure that you have a tight grip on that, because you will get beat up and pushed left and right, up and down and tossed, and come out of a dryer and just be all battered. And you still have to be able to stand up and hold on to that passion, hold on to that vision, and say, I still believe it.
So, along those lines, what's kind of one thing then you wish someone had told you before you started Duro that would have saved you time, money, or
That's a great question. I think, there's two things that I think I would have done differently. I think, again, the investment strategy. I don't have any regrets per se, but the bootstrapping was very hard, and it definitely set some of the DNA of Duro. Because we had to make decisions differently because we had very limited cash, and so we had different, short and long term bets that did ultimately, in good or bad ways, affect the course of Duro. had we started, with an initial investment, even of significant, modest funds, it still would have been a very different company, I'll bet. And the same thing with hiring. I'm so grateful for the team we have now, and I think we've hired some fantastic people along the way. But I did kind of get a little blindsided. I believe so much that our vision and our product was so good that, anyone we hired, with obviously reasonable intelligence, skills, and capability would be able to understand it and provide value. And that wasn't always the case, right? And I think certainly in a more niche product category like this, I wasn't expecting everyone to start on day one and understand PLM, or this customer market as well as we did. But I expected them to be able to learn it and to embrace it and to be able to contribute to it. And then that ended up not always being the case. And so that too, spending 10% extra more time on hiring, I think can go a long way.
And just one more question for the aspiring founders. What resources, books, even mentors have been most valuable to you as a founder?
Yeah, there's quite a few books. There's one that I'm rereading, but it's now the second edition. One book that actually really changed my career, which I read a long, long time ago, was inspired by Marty Kagan, which is a book about product marketing, product management. And that was I read it earlier in my career. A mentor, gave me a copy, and that really taught me, how do you build a product, right? And how do you engage, the various parties to solicit information as well as to disseminate it and share your vision and get people behind it. He said the first book, I can't remember the exact dates, but I think the first book came out like early 2000s. And so he revised it, I think the late 2010s, and with obviously innovations and technologies and other anecdotes that have since come to market. And so I'm reading that now again to get re-inspired. Other things too, like early on, what helped me was a book called Pitch Anything, which really helped with my fundraising skills and capabilities, and just kind of really putting myself in the mindset of an investor. He goes through a great analogy, which isn't unique to him, but it was a way he put it. The croc brain. The brain kind of parses information in different ways, and you have to find a way in 30 seconds to get to the right part of the brain. If you're trying to attract the wrong part of the brain, you can get rejected all the time. And he does a very good job at explaining that. The other thing too for me was Don't Split the Difference. Incredible book on how to negotiate, how to do deals. Really, that helped me. And I still take some of the lessons learned. I use it in my day to day. I've got two small kids who are constantly negotiating with me.
Chris Moss would be quite proud.
I just need to, like, and the response to everything is, I just need to, I just need to finish this game. I just need to finish this cookie, whatever it is. So you're constantly negotiating. So Never Split the Difference is another book. And then a couple of entrepreneurial stories. Phil Knight's Shoe Dog, incredible story of how Nike's foundation, up in Oregon, and to what the wildly success they are. Those were all really good books. Lots of various things. I mean, I think you go online, you find one of these books, and there's, Amazon, all the algorithms will tell you the ones that relate to it. Yeah.
If we just have time for just a couple more questions, what's next for Duro? What are you most excited about in the coming?
Yeah. So we just closed a couple of large deals, which will be putting some press out shortly. But there's a fantastic opportunities ahead in Duro. Like, the market is really, really starting to catch up to what our vision has always been, and really looking at Duro through new eyes. And I think we're seeing a really resurgence of interest in what we're doing. I think that, in combination of just our own product maturity, we're attracting some very, very exciting customers and partners. And so seeing where that journey takes us, working with them, as well as, again, our own innovations and advancements with this new product, retrenching that I talked about, I really truly think that we are changing how hardware is being designed and manufactured. The way that we handle data, the way that we integrate, is really changing the game from how legacy products have worked.
It's exciting. One last question we ask all of our guests, which is there something small but powerful that our listeners can try this week, one practice, a tip, a shift, that can immediately move the needle for themselves as an entrepreneur or as a founder?
Exercise. Yeah. I think what I'm not the best at doing this, I'll admit. It's just so easy to get into the trap of the weeds, and you're just dealing with all, especially as a founder, all the fires that get to you. And so you're just like whack-a-mole, you're just trying to get them all, dealing with one at a time. And it can be very difficult to pull yourself away to get up out of the weeds and into the 60,000 foot view. So you're thinking ahead, whether it's a week, a month, a quarter, a year. Like, you really have to be doing that as a founder. And I found that personally, if I just come to work and sit at my desk, it's too easy for me to get back into the weeds. Whereas if I get out, whether it's go for a run, go for a bike ride, or even just go for a walk, I don't have access to that technology, right? Or the same way. And so it helps separate me and allows my mind to wander and really start, remembering, oh, right, I need to think about that partnership. Oh, right, I need to think about that deal. And oh, right, I need to think about that long-term feature or that market that we want to talk, get into. And so whatever the catalyst is for you or the vehicle, for me, it was just, even modest exercise, just getting away from the laptop.
Michael, thank you so much for spending some time with us and our audience. There is still probably so much more that we can dig into, but it's been fantastic. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Ed. I really enjoyed it.
So for our listeners, we will have another episode coming up soon. Thank you. And thank you again.